Hello, everyone. Welcome to the HMAA webinar with our presenter, George Hoad, who's going to talk about arts and crafts gardens of the UK. George is actually secretary of HMAA and a great lover, I think, of arts and crafts gardens, visited them many times in the UK. And I think don't need more introduction than that, George. If you want to start your wonderful presentation, we're all ears to hear it.
All right. Well, thank you, Jennifer. And hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk, as Jennifer said, on the arts and crafts gardens of the UK. Now, this is my own personal take on arts and crafts gardens, and many of the gardens I know very well, and some of them have only visited the once. And I will be reading from some notes quite often, and that's just to make sure that I get my facts correct today. So, the first question is, what is an arts and crafts garden? Well, the arts and crafts gardens, they grew out of the arts and crafts movement, which in turn was a reaction against the Industrial Revolution. Now, there we go. So in simple terms, the Industrial Revolution was a transition period from handmade, homemade production through to mechanisation. Now, the key factors were the invention of the steam engine and other innovations, the abundance of crucial raw materials right across the UK, such as coal and iron ore for steel manufacturing, and the mechanised factory systems, which made textile industry the dominant one in terms of employment and value. Now, while the Industrial Revolution had many benefits and it cemented the dominance of the British Empire, it did have a serious downside. Now, the Greater Manchester area, for example, had over 2,400 cotton factories, and it became nicknamed as Cottonopolis. And prior to 1760, about 90% of the UK population were rural based, living in small villages, hamlets, farming communities. And a century later, about 1850, it was about 50-50. So 50% of the population had moved into the cities. And this because of the loss of many of those small homemade, handmade little cottage industries. The families had to move into these big burgeoning cities just to make a living. So this caused overcrowding because there were a lot of shanty towns and slums on the edges of the big cities. Little or no sanitation, so disease became rife. And there were no labour laws back then, as you probably realise. And a working day for an adult could be anywhere between 12 and 16 hours. And children as young as 4 were employed in a lot of these factories, particularly the textile mills, the cotton industry. So by the 1850s, prominent voices started to speak out against the social inequity and the appalling conditions that the working class was put under. And one of the most prominent voices of the era was the great John Ruskin. Now, he was an artist, a writer, a philanthropist, and a social reformer. Ruskin believed in the power of art to transform the lives of people for the better. He promoted women's education and improved conditions for the working classes. Ruskin advocated traditional craftsmanship, simple forms, and the use of natural materials, and he influenced and inspired what was to become the arts and crafts movement. Now, around that photo of Ruskin is Brantwood, his property that he bought in 1871 on Lake Coniston, which is in the Lake District, Coniston Waters. And it's a magnificent garden. I've been there a few times to visit, and it's very much on the Robinson principle of a wild garden, a little more formal around the house, but he used to love going up. He had hundreds of acres that he'd manicure up the back there, and he loved to just sit there. And that's where he did a lot of his writing and thinking on these social reforms. But this reaction against the industrialization and a desire to revive traditional craftsmanship. Now, it was inspired by Ruskin, but it was led by this man, William Morris. Now, Morris is largely remembered today for his glorious textile and wallpaper designs that you can see there. But he was the man who inspired his fellow artists and craftsmen, and he advocated the importance of traditional English arts and crafts. Now, you can see some examples there. The arts and crafts movement, it was basically a reaction against the mass production of goods brought about by the Industrial Revolution, which valued quantity over quality and mechanisation over craftsmanship. And the arts and crafts movement also rejected the excessive ornamentation of the Victorian period, especially in the garden. Now, arts and crafts gardens, now to me, they can be best described as formal in structure, but softened with exuberant, colourful plantings. And importantly, it's an extension of the house. It's an integration of house and landscape. Now, there's no handbook that says this is an arts and crafts garden. There's lots of elements that make it up. The unity of house and garden is important. So you go out from the house, it's a little formal with terraces and whatever, but then it dissolves into different areas. So pergolas are a feature. They have quite often have focal points, stairs and seating. And you can see that lovely semicircular stairs there. That's a big feature of a lot of the gardens. Balustrading, garden rooms, that's arts and crafts gardens, that's where they came from. Water is used in them, and the use of summer houses or garden houses is also dominant throughout. Of course, beds and borders and that exuberant planting that a lot of these gardens had. Topiary is a big feature in the gardens, and along with formal structures like that, those trees there, and strangely enough, sundials. Just about every arts and crafts garden I've been to has a sundial. Now, largely forgotten today, but this man, William Robinson, is renowned for his wild and natural gardening methods, and he vehemently rejected the rigid, unnatural, formal garden designs that were popular during the Victorian era. Now you can see there, this is what he hated, those lovely big bedding schemes that the Victorians loved. Now these are the top two at Regent's Park in London, and the bottom two are at Waddesdon Manor in Buckinghamshire. And part of the reason Robinson rejected these ideas is because they took enormous labour forces to keep them manicured on a daily basis. And it was a drain on them. And he felt they were so unnatural looking, which I'll let you make your own mind up about that one. But Robinson was a friend to both Ruskin and William Morris. And through the many books and garden magazines that he published, Robinson promoted his strong views on gardening and those of all of his friends. And Robinson purchased Gravetye Manor in 1885, and he set about putting his ideas into practice. Now, you can see at the back of the house there, that lovely formal structure there. In Robinson's day, that actually had some pergolas and climbing arches on there. But today it's this lovely lawn that you come out onto that, and then at the back of where I'm taking that photo, you've got a lovely pergola right across there with this lovely herbaceous borders there along the side. And then if you go back into the centre, there's the ubiquitous sundial. You look up into this lovely terrace and it dissolves into the back into a wild garden, which Robinson was very famous for. So if you wander up through those lovely azaleas there, you end up in the old orchard section with those lovely camassias underneath there. So it's starting to get a bit more wild, but still a garden. And then you end up in the wild garden, which was still part of Robinson's idea of a garden, but you're getting back to nature, basically. Now, that chap up the top there, that's Tom Coward. Tom is the head gardener. He's been there for some time, and he's the man responsible for taking Gravetye back to the way that Robinson really would have liked it. So he's implemented a lot of Robinson's ideas and had been neglected for some time. And that's me in the dining room with two very dear American friends, Linda Cobb and Linda Smith. I was having a birthday high tea there one year. Now, these are perhaps the two giants of the arts and crafts garden. I think everyone knows them, Sir Edward Lutyens and Gertrude Jekyll. Now, this unlikely pairing, when they first met, he was only 20 and she was 45. But this pairing resulted in some of the finest gardens created during this period. They collaborated for over 40 years on over 100 gardens. Lutyens always the architect and Jekyll the plantswoman. Now, Jekyll wrote 13 gardening books and over 1,000 magazine articles during her life, and she's renowned for her use of colour, especially the colour wheel. She was an artist in the garden. And it was Lutyens in 1896. Lutyens designed Jekyll's magnificent arts and crafts home in Surrey, Munstead Wood. Now, the oak trees were felled on the property. The stone was quarried nearby and local tradesmen were employed, all part of this arts and crafts ethos. Now, inside the house, you can see the use of the beams there, the oak beams. That's and the wood panelling, very much an arts and crafts idea of exposing the artist's work, the craftsmen, the builders in this case. And that lady there, that's Lady Clark. Her and her husband bought Munstead Wood in the late 60s. And I got to know her very well in I think about 2013. I first visited and came up and had tea, invited to have tea, and took my American friends, the Lindas, up there, and I built up quite a lovely friendship. And it was during the COVID period. She was out visiting her son in Western Australia, and we'd have regular phone calls while she was stranded here. But she passed at the age of 97, only in 2022. And luckily, the National Trust has bought Munstead Wood and it's going to be open shortly to the general public. And they've retained Annabelle, the head gardener, which you'll see in just a sec. But that galley I showed you earlier with the woodwork, that's called the North Court, the garden outside. And you can see Lutyens' little sketch down there in the corner with a little tiny sketch of Gertrude Jekyll, which he used to call Bumps. Now, if you come out from there, you've got the tank garden, very formal around the house, as you can see, those lovely topiary balls and Lutyens' step work there. He's very famous for his beautiful steps. Then you come out further and you're in the nuttery, the nut walk, and there's some hazels there, which are obviously cut and used throughout the garden throughout the year. But Jekyll was someone who loved to plant a favourite plant en masse. And here we have hellebores, and that was January some years back. I was visiting, so there's not much out except an amazing collection of the hellebores there, as you can see. But if you keep on walking forward, you come under this lovely big pergola, and then you could go left, right, or wherever. But if you went straight ahead, you'd come into Jekyll's spring garden. And this is where she used to experiment with colour coordinations, different sizes, shapes, and varieties, just to get it right. And then she would then take them into the many gardens. She did about 400 in her lifetime designed. That's Annabelle Watts, the head gardener. She's been retained by the National Trust, and she was just showing me there some examples of what the old nursery section used to look like. Now, there's a lovely little corner right on the other side of Munstead Wood, and this is just planted once again with one particular plant, and it's the Munstead Bunch primroses. Now, Jekyll loved primroses, and she found this particular one in a garden not far away, propagated it, and that's always been there now for well over 100 years. And when you walk in there on a lovely warm summer's day, you can see, you just get that beautiful waft, the little fragrance that they have. It's quite beautiful. Another corner of the garden, quite a large corner, is the woodland garden. Now, this was inspired by a great friend of hers, which was William Robinson, who had the idea of the wild garden. So going from the formal up into what they would call a wild garden. This is taken in that January, so it's just coming out of winter. Some spring bulbs are appearing. but you can see that's winter, and they're in summer. It's an area, they have the beautiful Ghent hybrid azaleas, a great favourite of hers and Robinson. And this is her famous main border, deep and got a good length to it. And this is where she would once again experiment, especially with the colour wheel idea, going from the blues into some yellows, into the reds and oranges right along there. That was her idea on that colour wheel. And that's early spring, that photo. But you can see Helen Allingham has done some around the time it was at its peak, around the 1900, 1905 period. So lots of glorious colours and some unusual combinations, which she used to like to try. Now, another Jekyll and Lutyens garden I had the great pleasure of visiting last year in Ireland, Haywood Gardens. And it's one that I was always fascinated by because it's quite different to all the other gardens that they designed. So you've got this formal entry, and there's the garden there, surrounded by this lovely wall. It's a complete set of circles graduating up. So you can seat on the bottom there, and there's a typical Lutyens summer house there at the very end. And you can see the walls. He's punctuated them with these lovely little windows all the way around. And a big feature of arts and crafts gardens is to soften the stonework, whether it be steps or walls or whatever, with lots of planting. So they'd take the mortar out and they'd poke little plants in and let them naturalise in the walls. And you can see there they've got a climbing rose in a different section and more little plantings there. So Hesticombe House, this would probably be the most famous surviving Lutyens Jekyll garden. It had been restored some years ago. The chap there, he wanted this garden on the side, a very formal garden, but one that he could appreciate the views across. So that's looking from the house, and a typical Lutyens seat there. And it's called the Great Plat. And you can see it's got a very symmetrical design there by Lutyens, and it's softened by the Jekyll's planting. And you can see all around the borders of those beds there, that's begonias, which was a great favourite of Jekyll. And if you look, that's probably a very early spring photo, and that's a summer photo. And you can see she liked very repetitive plantings throughout. And that because that's a very faithful reproduction of a Jekyll planting from way back when. If you look at the very back of the photo there, you can see this beautiful pergola, and there it is looking through it in the summer months. So just a lovely exuberant planting there, which softens the architecture. And you'll probably recognize that little Lutyens feature. He put a lot of these windows very similar, if not the same, through many of his gardens. Now, either side of the Great Plat, you have these wonderful water rills, beautifully designed, very decorative just to look at. And they showcased a lot of the bog plants, the water plants that would come there. And if you look up the other end, looking away, a typical Lutyens, he liked to work in circles or semicircles. So there were no hard edges in Lutyens designs. And that mask at the top there, that face, it just dribbles a little bit of water into a pond there, which runs along the rill. And in another part of that garden there, these are Lutyens steps, as I say, softened with plantings let go through there. They'd pull out a little pocket and plant something in. And this will take you up into this orangery area. Although it looks like a very old building, Lutyens built that just over 100 years ago. And it's quite unusual, really. It's not really what you'd call an arts and crafts building, but it has a lot of the principles inside the construction of it. But it sits above a bit of a sunk garden, which is a big arts and crafts feature. And nearby we have the Dutch garden. I've never worked out why they call it the Dutch garden, but it's quite a lovely spot. I adore those urns that go right through there. So another great of the arts and crafts movement was Harold Peto. Now, Peto created some of the finest gardens. Now, he was born into a very wealthy family, and at the age of 22, having studied architecture, he formed a partnership with Ernest George in 1876, and they launched a very successful architectural firm of George and Peto. Now, about 20 years later, at the age of 40 and financially secure, Peto left the firm to embark on a career in garden design, primarily with an Italianate influence. And incidentally, the young Edward Lutyens studied for a year in 1887 at the firm of George and Peto, and he was tutored by Harold Peto. So here we have Heel House. Now this is a garden I stumbled across some years ago, but it's got all the features of an arts and crafts garden. You can see the avenues of trees each side there, the straight path up there, softened with plantings, and the balustrading right across the front of the house. And the house was originally there, but it was given an arts and crafts feel. So if we look from the side across there, we've got the two mirrored ponds. So we've got the water features there. And as you can see, right smack bang in the middle, sundial. And you can see the sundial in the distance there, but this is another view with the balustrading, the steps into that very formal. But now you start to move down those steps away from the formal garden into a wild section. So you can see here the River Avon, which goes around, I think from memory, about a half or 2/3 of the garden. It's a beautiful feature throughout. So this is, although it's heavily gardened and manicured, this is the wild section of the garden. And of that period, you might realize that the Japanese, the Oriental influence around 1900 was quite high. And so Peto quite often would give his gardens a bit of an Oriental flavour. So you've got the lovely Japanese tea house there and the red Oriental bridge across the River Avon. So another big commission he had was Westdean Gardens. This was the owner was a chap he went to school with. And this is in the wall garden, a lovely double herbaceous border there. But what he's famous for at Westdean is this magnificent pergola. It's 100 metres long or 300 foot, and it's right on this ridge, and it just sails through, and it's a really strong architectural feature in the garden. And you can see these lovely pillars there, but the whole thing is softened by these wonderful plantings. There's some clematis growing through it. And when you get to the center, there's a lovely axis that runs through the center. And you can see the pond there, the water feature in it, and the roses growing over it. And then down one end is a sunk garden with a Lutyens bench there, of course. So, as I say, sunken gardens are a big feature of this period. And then if you look through the 100 metres, right down the other end, you've got this beautiful little summer house to hide in. So quite often the pergolas this size were used for promenading, of course, and just to getting out of the summer heat that they would have. It might get up to 30, heaven forbid, one day. But I know of late they've been getting a lot higher than that. But yeah, beautiful feature in this garden, and it's been restored some years back, back to its pristine state. So another garden on my bucket list last year when I was in Ireland is Garnish Island. Now this is one of Peto's, to me, his great achievements. So just that view there, it's become quite iconic. You've got that lovely Italianate little structure there at the end. And if you stand there, you take in this most magnificent vista of the islands and the hills in the background there. And if you look back, you'll see the summer house, all around, but very typical, lovely formal structure there. And then it's softened all around on this little island. But if you go through across a park there, you come into his double herbaceous border there in the wall garden. And there's just some examples of flowers that were out there at the time. Beautiful spot. And luckily I had a lovely sunny day to visit. And this is Iford Manor. This is the home that Peto bought himself in 1899, and he set about turning the house and the garden into a typical Italianate arts and crafts garden. So you've got the River Frome running in front there, and then as you come up the front steps, he'd put an Italianate portico on the house to give it that feel that he wanted. And as you come up the steps, he was big on statuary and urns and everything, which is very Italian in its style. But you can see there that softening of the steps, because you can imagine if all of that planting was taken away, it would be very hard. But it's lovely how it's all softened and they've always let go there. Then you go right up to the top of that hill, the terrace there, and it's very typical of an Italianate terrace. It's reminiscent in many ways of somewhere, if you think of the Appian Way in Italy, where they'd have the sarcophagus and the pots and urns and statues all along the roadway. And that's the idea he was trying to create here, with these lovely spaces either side, that lovely loggia in the corner, beautifully manicured, and the topiary there, as say very much in keeping with the arts and crafts flavour. And then on the other side, he's got a mirroring one that looks very similar. So beautifully preserved garden this is. These wonderful big features. As you can see, he'd brought all of these back from Italy at a time when you could, of course, do that. He used to make regular trips over. Um, and But it just looks so marvelous there when you go up there, because you get wonderful views of the surrounding countryside. And then you can walk up the back there, up those steps, and into the wild garden. And then in a little pocket, you'll see another nod to an Oriental style garden, which you just come across. So another great of the arts and crafts movement was Thomas Mawson. Now, Mawson was very prolific. And in 1900, he wrote the definitive book on the subject, and he called it The Art and Craft of Garden Making. And it was basically a wonderful big picture book of his gardens. Now, in the 1880s, Mawson, along with two of his brothers, started the Lakeland Nursery in the Lake District. And the business proved to be such a great success that Mawson was free to turn his attention primarily to garden design. Now, a great surviving example of Mawson's work is at Diffrin in Wales. Now, the house was already there. It's got a beautiful big park attached to it, but the owner wanted a series of gardens on the side, more leisure type gardens. So Mawson created different ones there, as I say. So this is a lovely double herbaceous border. Now, this is resting. It's just coming into spring. And the predominant flower while I was in these gardens was the tulip. Now, something that I'm happy to go to the UK to see every time. I love tulips, but can't grow them where I live. But this garden is quite famous for its tulip displays. And very unusual pergolas. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know if any of you have either. But obviously, throughout the spring and summer months, they'll be softened with lots of foliage as it comes through. But quite unusual. And these go right through the gardens there. And then another section, he's got a sunk garden, quite an unusual one given the base. But once again, pockets of plantings are put through there just to give it the interest. And then right down the bottom, you've got the lavender court and folly, which really is a bit of a folly. I just see it as a very big theatrical set. And apparently in the 10s and the 20s, they'd have the parties, they'd get around in all their finery in this particular area. That's what it was actually built for. But as you go out into the gardens, as it dissipates into the wild garden, you've got these lovely big arboretums with different plantings. But the spectacular one here is the heatherbank. Quite unusual to see in these gardens. It's a wonderful jigsaw of different colours, and it's quite spectacular. I don't think I've ever seen one as good, except up in Scotland. So Rydal Hall, this is in the Lake District where the business was and where he resided. And this is one of his famous commissions. It's not a very big garden, and it's just this big formal block in the centre, but it does have all the hallmarks of a typical Mawson garden. And he was renowned for the use of stonework. And you can see that lovely balustrading in front of the house, and these two mirror image symmetrical steps coming down, the fountain, the use of topiary there. And if you're looking back into the beautiful view there, and the tulips are out there. So restrained planting at this time of year, but it's just what they wanted in this type of garden. And there's another view from the side there, the balustrading, the use of the steps. So very formal, but softened by the planting. And then if you go, oh, there's the beautiful tulips. And then if you go over the back, you can see that stairs there that mirrors what takes you up into the house. It's a beautiful, fine work, and that's what Mawson was renowned for, and got a lot of his commissions on the base of. Um, and the walls, once again, softened with these lovely ferns. They were just allowed to grow through, so you haven't got these big, stark stonework walls. So you can't have an arts and crafts garden without a lovely arts and crafts house. And although many houses employed the arts and crafts people to build them, sometimes whole houses, that were built. So I guess a bit of an irony is that a lot of the arts and crafts gardens and houses, although it was a reaction against the wealthy for the working class, the working class could never afford these houses or these gardens. But the Barnsley brothers, they were responsible for some of the finest of the houses in that area in that time. They were master builders and also furniture designers. They would furnish the house as well. And Ernest Barnsley is responsible for one of the greatest of these, and that is at Rodmartin Manor in Gloucestershire. Now, this was commissioned by the Biddulph family in 1909, and it took 20 years to complete because everything was done by hand. Everything you're looking at was created. So it was local stone, local timber, and local craftsmen. And in some of those lower rooms, they set up workshops to teach people the crafts so that they wouldn't die out. And so everything in the house, all the furniture, the textiles, was all created on site. So if we go out into the garden, Barnsley designed these as well. And all across the back, we have what they termed as the leisure garden. So there's a beautiful little one here called the topiary and troughery garden. And it once again has all those little elements, the topiary, the stone, the formality, and taking the eye out into the distance. And with the troughs there, it was another part of the arts and crafts idea that you would reuse materials. And here they're using agricultural troughs. And you can see they've got little pockets of them, particularly for alpine planting. They're quite good. So a bit further along in the leisure garden, they've got these wonderful pollarded trees there. And so this is just coming into spring. So this will erupt with colour shortly. But if you go through that photo, you come to that little centerpiece there, and you can see the formality softened by these lovely plantings. The sunken garden, which was in all these gardens. So that was something that you could look down on. There's a few viewing platforms to check that one out. Or it was always meant as a little quiet corner where you could escape away from the hubbub of the main garden. And probably one of the most famous features of Rodmartin in the garden is this double herbaceous border with these lovely clipped yew edges and that glorious little summer house right down the end. And that's looking back at the main house in summer when some of the plantings had actually come out. So it really is a very special house that it's been retained as it was constructed just over a century ago. Now, Henry Avery Tipping. Now, that's probably a name that many people won't be familiar with, but he was one of the most influential figures of the arts and crafts movement, not so much of the gardens that he designed, but because he knew everyone. Tipping was a major contributor to the prestigious Country Life magazine, which is still in operation today, and he was there from 1905 to 1933. And he was architectural editor for 17 years. And he was a friend with Peto, Jekyll, Lutyens, William Robinson, and he wrote numerous articles for Robinson's popular magazine, The Garden. And he had notable commissions throughout his life. One of them was Chequers. Some of you might know it as the English Prime Minister's country residence. Dartington Hall, and Windcliffe Court. Now, I stumbled across this little gem of a garden some years ago. I was staying in the area and this was open. And when you look at it, it's got all the elements of an arts and crafts garden. Now, it was created by Tipping in 1920, so at the end of the period. So he was able to utilise a lot of the ideas that had gone before. So that use of topiary there, so it's a bit quirky there these days. Very typical of the Lutchen steps, that semicircular, and then it flips over and mirrors on the other side. Strange little topiary section there in the garden. But to me, the little gem of this garden was this sunk garden with a little water feature in the centre. Lovely, fairly simple plantings all around at that time of year, and that gorgeous little summer house in the corner. And that's looking back from the summer house to the main house. But quite a, not a very large garden, but it's got really nice elements to it. So Lawrence Johnson, now this is a name that a lot of people will know, one of the greats of the arts and craft movement. Now he's remembered today for creating just one garden, and perhaps the most celebrated and influential of the 20th century, and of course that's Hidcote Manor. Now Johnson, he had a vision for Hidcote of a wild garden in a formal setting. Now Hidcote is just set in 10 acres and he started it in 1907. Now Hidcote is a series of garden rooms and enclosures and the perfect showcase for Johnson, the avid plant collector and plantsman. Now there's Hidcote Manor there. Not much to look at really from a gardener's point of view as you enter these days, but you go through the house there and you come out after a few rooms into the White Garden, and that says it all about the arts and crafts style. And this is the first of the garden enclosures, and Hidcote is perhaps one of the greatest examples of garden rooms. Each one is very different and they're all separated by a hedge or some other device. You go through there into the old garden, and this is really a cottage garden, a picking garden with lots of, you can see some gorgeous colours there throughout the spring and the summer. And then you come to the circle and you've got to decide, will I go straight ahead, left or right? And this is one of the joys of these, such a big garden like he created. He wanted to take you in lots of areas, and as I say, everyone is different. But the circle is quite renowned at a particular time of year, because if you're lucky enough to be there, the beautiful lilacs are out, and it just is the most amazing. Each corner has a lilac tree, and it's just gorgeous. So if you go straight ahead, you come across the famous red border. Now, throughout the year, this has just got, as you can see, red foliage, which all contrast with each other. And throughout the seasons, you'll have all the annuals and perennials coming through with lots of flower colour. And then looking up there, you've got the two little mirroring summer houses either side. And then if you continue straight ahead, you've got the stilt garden, and that'll take you through to the gates at the top there, where you've got these lovely views over the Cotswolds. And there's the gates, and that's looking back into the garden itself. Now, if you go down to the side, you have the pillar garden. So I'd say they're all completely different, these gardens he created. Lovely clipped yew there. And then what's lovely about this part of the garden, it showcases these wonderful peonies that there's every shape, colour and size you can imagine. Beautiful displays. And then as you slip through the pillar garden, you come into the lower stream garden. And this is where it starts to get a bit wilder, and you've got lovely water plants throughout there. A lot of skunk cabbages, I recall. And then you end up in the wilderness, as say this influence of Robinson by putting these wild areas into the garden, which were also good habitat gardens as well. Then you can work your way back across the long walk. Now this goes right through this section of the garden. It's this beautiful big statement And it's a promenading area, but you can duck across and there's lots of different pockets through there. So up one end, of course, these lovely mirroring summer houses at the top of the red border. But if you cut across the long walk, you've got the central stream garden. And I love this section down here because at any time of the year, it's got lovely contrasting foliage, flowers, colour, just everything about it. It's a really lovely part. And this is where, in his day, obviously Johnson was able to experiment and really let his plantsmen, ideas go wild. And you can see some of the plants that are down there in flower. And then just around a bit further, you have the bathing pool garden. And this is where Johnson and his friends would swim in the summer months, and just a lovely enclosed area. So once again, completely enclosed, and probably being a bathing pool, he wanted that seclusion there as well, although obviously it wasn't open to the public in his day. And you can see at the end there, they've got these lovely topiaries. And if you look at the steps, they're very reminiscent of Lutyens, that semicircular with almost like tiles put on their edge. And then if you look back through the topiary, back to the bathing pool, this section here is called the fuchsia garden. And I've been to Hidcoton many times over the last 40 years, and I've yet to see a fuchsia. When I go, there's usually these glorious tulips. So I don't know why they call it the fuchsia garden, but hey, I don't know. If you keep on going to the side, they've got Mrs. Winthrop's garden. Now, that was his mother, Mrs. Winthrop. And after she passed, he created this memorial garden for her. And look what's in the middle lurking there, another sundial. So they're everywhere. And then if you go back around, there's this lovely arbor, which on a warm day is a lovely spot to go through. And then you eventually work your way back to the White Garden there as you come in. Now, I've focused at Hidcote on the arts and crafts area. There's much more of the garden, especially on the other side to see, but I just wanted to look at that side of it. So, Great Dixter, the last garden we're going to visit here today. Now, it's also one of the most influential gardens of the last century. And it's a garden that I know very well. I visited Great Dixter regularly for the last 20 years or so, and I've had the great privilege and pleasure of attending probably at least 5 of their week-long symposiums on the art of gardening. And that's where I got to meet my 2 lovely friends, Linda, the 2 Lindas earlier, and Fergus Garrett, the head gardener there, has become good friends, etc. So I've made a lot of friends at Dixter. Now, Great Dixter, it's an old 15th century medieval hall, and it was purchased in about 1912 by the Lloyd family. And Sir Edward Lutyens was commissioned to turn the building into a large family home. So he laid out much of the structure of the gardens, which were planted out by the Lloyds, taking inspiration from Gertrude Jekyll and William Robinson. So if we take a tour around the garden, that section there on the right, that's the old medieval hall. And you can see how Lutyens has married it all together into an arts and crafts style home. Now that's the old medieval hall. And you can see back when we were looking at what Lutyens did at Munstead Wood, he's exposing the beams. So the arts and crafts movement very much picked up on that medieval style of garden, of building. And I must say, see the beautiful windows there. They're in need of restoration these days. And my friend Linda Smith and her husband have sponsored some of the restorations of those windows. And they've dedicated one of them to me. So I'll have a little glass brick that says that. So I thank my friend Linda and husband very much for that. So as you exit the Great Hall, there's a beautiful pot display, and it changes half weekly, weekly, depending on, and this is obviously early spring when the bulbs are out, but it's a beautiful big statement as you enter the garden. And then you work your way up into the Peacock Garden. Now, that ghostly figure there, that's Nathaniel Lloyd. Now, he who purchased the place, but his big thing, he loved yew, topiary and hedges and creating all of these wonderful things. So he's responsible for all of these throughout the garden. They're a wonderful testament to him. And so this is called the Peacock Garden for obvious reasons. And if you go through the wall there, you come out on the other side, and there's Christopher Lloyd, Nathaniel's son. And it was really Christopher Lloyd who put Great Dixter on the map, particularly to us today. And I like to describe Great Dixter as a cottage garden on steroids. Because Christo just packed everything in there. He had these wild and wonderful colour combinations and planting combinations, and that's what's really made it very famous. And that's been continued after his death. Christo passed 20 years ago, and Fergus Garrett and his team carry that legacy forward and really have built on it. But you can see there this wonderful planting, uh, and that's a combination of really Christo and Fergus Garrett. And this is what the whole garden looks like. It's this succession planting. And that's looking from the high garden back into the Peacock Garden, and a beautiful view there with the house in the background. If you work your way through all those yew hedges and topiary walls, you'll finally come out at the bottom there into the meadow garden. Now, the meadows around Great Dixter, there's quite a few, and they're the legacy of Daisy Lloyd, Nathaniel's wife. Now, her big thing was that the meadows and the lawns shouldn't be mown all the time. She wanted to let the biodiversity of the area take over. And so there were, bulbs and that planted through there, but a lot of them have come back by their own accord. And probably most famously in that bottom left there, that purple, that's a native orchid that really has crept back into the garden. It had been lost almost because of the the agricultural production. A lot of the fields were just churned up in the probably last 60, 70 years. So Great Dixter now is a hive of biodiversity. It has been recognised nationally over there for its biodiversity and the insects that it's got in there and the little critters. So the other great feature as you come through the garden is the great border there. This is where Christo really let himself go wild. It's about 60 metres long and 5 metres deep. And it's a wonderful example of succession planting. So from the late winter period, you'll get 4 or 5 successions of plantings come through, from the bulbs early in the season right through to some of the annuals. Then you've got the perennials taking over. And it's just this cacophony of colour, which the whole garden probably has a life of about 10 months. So longer than in a lot of other gardens, they let things just sit there to go to seed and get lovely colours in them. So here's an example of some of the plantings in the border. And then as we work our way up the back of the house, you can see by now you'll recognise as the typical Lutyens set of stairs there. Beautiful circles there and semicircles that take you down from that level into the next. And the walls there, as I say, have been allowed to naturalise over many decades with plantings, and it really does soften the whole look. So if you look from the back of the house, that's what is now called the exotic garden. But in Daisy Lloyd's day, that was the famous rose garden that Lutyens had planted for her. And Christopher Lloyd, very famously in 1993, I think it was, ripped up most of the roses with Fergus's assistance. And he wanted something different, much more wild and exotic and very tropical. And so each year that's planted out in that fashion now. So behind the exotic garden, you have the nursery, which has been a big part of Dixter for many decades, utilising a lot of the old buildings that are there. And then you come back up around the other side of the house through a very typical Lutyens archway, and you're in the wall garden. And the wall garden has another one of those magnificent pot displays that are tweaked about twice a week in the summer months as things start to go over. And they're quite a big feature, but obviously that's a spring display of bulbs particularly tulips at the back there. Then you go through another walled section there, another archway, and you can see how Lutyens got the semicircular going up. And then you come out into the sunk garden, as I say, a big feature of that period. Now, Lutyens had designed this to be a lawn, but Nathaniel Lloyd decided he wanted a sunk garden, and so he was the one who designed the stonework there and the pond in the middle. And it was Christo later on in years who has put together this wonderful, exuberant planting, which really takes over this section. You've got to fight your way through the paths quite often. So you can see there's some of the plantings. And then if you work your way through the archway, you end up back on the main paths, which takes you down to the house or back onto the road there. And that's Fergus Garrett, and that's me with one of my symposiums there over the years, working in the garden. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of Arts and Crafts Gardens of the UK. So thank you very much.
Oh, George, thank you. That was just so wonderful. I feel like I've been visiting the UK with you, and your photos are superb. I'm sure Judy's,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Yes. Yes. Fabulous, fabulous, George. And I mean, really just such a journey. And but also what I liked was the repetitive things too that kept coming up the steps and the sundial. In fact, I thought George said that that this was a retreat from the factory and the mass production, but obviously they had a factory somewhere making those sundials, didn't they? Because they all look the same.
Yeah, because when I was looking at the gardens, photographs of them, yeah, I kept thinking, there were these things like sundials. I'm thinking, well, so obviously as I say, there is no book that says this is what an arts and crafts garden is. I mean, the one that Mawson did is really his own gardens. It's a bit of an exercise in have a look how fabulous I am. I've got one of the books here. It weighs a mozza. It's massive. But you just look at all those ingredients, and that's why I put that at the beginning. And sundials is one of them. Virtually every arts and crafts garden has a sundial in it, which when you think of England, I don't know how often it works.
So can you take questions?
Yes,
I've
please.
just got a couple. One was about the Rod Martin Manor, and you said that was the Biddulph family. Was that the same family that did Biddulph Grange? Do you know?
Look, I don't know, Judy. I should have researched that.
Okay, well,
I'm
I'll research
familiar
it and
with
let you know.
Biddulph Grange. I wouldn't think so because Biddulph Grange, oh, I can't think of his name now, but he, as you probably know, he created that amazing garden with all those different, well, each room he had was a different part of the world. That was his idea, a different country. But he blew all his money on that, and he died in penury. But the name could have a connection somewhere there.
Yeah, no, just it's not that common a name, is it?
No, no,
Did you meet Christopher Lloyd?
no. My first visit to Dixter was about a month after he died in 1986.
And when you say about the symposiums, can you tell us a bit more about those?
Well, they have, when I started doing them in about 2010 or 11 or something, I'd visited a few times before, and I booked in, and they only take 12 people. And it was the first two or three I did were all English. First couple were no, sorry, not English, were all American ladies, and that's how I got to know some of them so well because every other year I'd go over. And so what you do for that 7 days is, and it's intensive. Fergus Garrett takes you, the head gardener there, and his team work with him. But we go around the garden and we'll spend a day looking at things like succession planting. So we'll get workshops. So it's hands-on as well as educational, him describing how things are done. Another day we've gone to Chelsea Flower Show and he'll take us through the backside of all of that. We'd go up and visit Beth Chatto's garden, and I got to know Beth when she was alive, and that is a most amazing garden. That was always a joy to go up to. Gravetime Manor, that's how I got to know Tom, the head gardener there, because we'd always visit, and subsequently I've gone to visit there as well. But
So do you actually stay there at
yeah,
Great Dixter?
not. We'd stay in a hotel nearby, but you don't actually stay in the house. But I have had the privilege of staying in the house on a recent visit because there's no one actually staying in the house now. It's just if Fergus says you can do that, but so because there wouldn't be the rooms because now it really is a quite an important house and it's been retained internally as it was by the family, but it's lived in by these people. But a lot of the people from Christo's day, one by one, because he passed 20 years ago, have moved on from there. So there's new folk around, but the interior is just as it was in Christo's time.
Mm. I just had to quickly share a story of when in my touring days, I went a few times to garden in upstate New York. That now I've forgotten the name of it, but anyway, it was these famous stone crops. Sorry, it's coming back to me now. Stone crop, quite a famous garden. And because it's so cold there, they had a scarecrow in the middle of one of the veggie sections, and it was supposed to be a scarecrow of Gertrude Jekyll, all made out of straw, etc. But because it was so cold, every year it would sort of fall apart, and they'd have to remake it again in spring. And one year when I went there, I said, "My goodness, the Gertrude's getting fatter and fatter, isn't she?" And one of the girls said, "Well, the real Gertrude did too, apparently." So, I'm not sure it was quite deliberate, but it just happened that their patching was, as they patched, the straw got thicker and thicker, and ended up being like the real Gertrude anyway.
Yes, no, well, she wasn't a small lady at the end.
Happens to lots of us.
Well, will I stop the recording now? Because I think it's just about coming up to
Yep.
an hour. So, George, just formally, thank you again. And I'll stop the recording. And I'm sure everyone who watches this is going to have a fabulous watch.
Oh, well,
Thanks,
thank you,
George.
everyone. Thank you.